Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Planning and Development Committee meeting starting at 10:30 this morning. Roll call, Vice Chair, Councilmember Cobb.
Present.
Member President Kuda.
Here.
And Davida Russell, Chair. Okay, we have a couple things on our agenda today. We're going to start with the place of worship, legislation ordinance 031-2024 that happened on first reading. So I'm going to turn this portion over to Director Zamp.
Thank you, and we have a short presentation and also have some guests here to speak on this matter. But we wanted to give you some background on this legislation, sort of why it is happening in the first place, the history of it, which goes over a couple of years now, and some changes that are being proposed based upon public comment and Planning Commission comments. And this is something, just by the way, that will also provide a similar presentation in the public hearing. But we wanted to just start out by saying the way that people historically have prayed and the way that they worship today varies, right? There's many different ways. We have, some grand places like the Taj Mahal and Notre Dame, which is being rebuilt, which are places that are large and large people come there. And then we have smaller meeting houses and, storefront churches and sort of mid-sized suburban synagogues and various other ways in which people pray. But the problem for most communities, including ours, is that our zoning standards are a one-size-fits-all. And so in Cleveland Heights, we really only allow two types of places of worship. The grand places of worship that we see, like on Monticello and singing in some of our larger churches and synagogues, which are supposed to be large and on large pieces of property. And then meeting rooms, which are in our commercial districts. So that's how we treat commercial or sort of storefront churches, but there's nothing in between.
And when you say meeting rooms, can you explain just a little bit?
Sure, a meeting room is just a defined term in our code, which is essentially a place where a group of people are coming together to hold a meeting, to pray, whatever that may be, and that's in our commercial districts, that's permitted. So that's how places of worship in commercial districts are treated in the zoning code right now.
Okay.
Can places of worship, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Can places of worship be in commercial districts?
Well, they're in those meeting room spaces. So
I see. They're just called something else.
Yeah, but a large structure like we're sort of used to, those actually wouldn't be permitted in our commercial districts right now.
Okay.
They may be there, as a legacy, but to build a new, you couldn't do that today.
Okay.
So back in late 2022, we started this conversation with the Planning Commission, and we were looking for, how to right-size those standards for Cleveland Heights, particularly in our neighborhoods, because we know that people don't always drive to a synagogue or a church or a mosque. And we looked around the country at similar standards, and we looked particularly closer to home with regards to some of the Anabaptist, Mennonite and Amish worship standards in central Ohio. But we also looked particularly in New York and in Illinois, how they've been treating this. And we came up with a sort of a game plan that last year in July, we presented to the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission was on board at that time to forward those recommended changes to Council and start to prepare the legislation. So that's when we really got to work with the law department to look at legislation itself. And that's where law jumped in and said, well, the city of Beechwood was going through a process to do something similar. There was litigation in University Heights, and that's our LUPA, which we'll talk about in a second, but they were sort of behind the 8 ball, reacting to standards not fitting or permitting religious uses to have an equal and sort of level playing field. And we took all of that and put that into what became ordinance number 31. That was at a first reading at your March meeting, and then at that time we referred it to the Planning Commission. We'll talk about that in a second. But one of the things that Beechwood did and that law pointed out, which I think is a great idea, is we created a frequently asked questions document, which is part of your package. It's been online. And this is trying to identify those questions that we know people are going to ask about. And so we've updated that, but we really think the information is in there for people to sort of put it on their level because an ordinance can be sometimes confused using. We did reach out to our faith-based community, and some of those folks are here today to let them know of these changes. And it's been sort of generally supportive. There's some suggested changes that we've heard from that we'll let you know about in a second. We've discussed the changes with our police and fire departments to see how they feel about it, and they've got some recommendations that we're gonna highlight. And we've prepared an amended version of the ordinance that we then presented to Planning Commission on March 13th, which was their referral. They had some comments, but ultimately adopted that through a recommendation resolution. We invited the Planning Commission chair here, Jessica Cohen, to speak on that should you want that input. And then, of course, Monday night you referred it to this committee. So we're hopeful with that at the background that we can sort of give you an overview of what the changes are, and then really open it up for discussion.
Yes.
This is a quick question. So can you kind of give me a picture of what the outreach to the faith-based community looked like?
Outreach,
Phone calls?
a mix of phone calls and emails.
Okay,
And then
not a meeting, like a...
not a meeting, but interestingly, just as an aside, it's been interesting because a lot of folks we reached out to said, hey, this is the first time that the city's been reaching out to us. And this is just a cornerstone of engagement. Faith-based is so key because obviously they have congregations. So it's something we should talk about maybe in the second part of this meeting, how we can really engage with our faith-based community a lot more than we have. But this was a good start. So I just wanted to run down the intent, right? The intent is to permit a range of religious structures and uses that are contextual in the neighborhood, court, or node, or building that is located. So this is really trying to find that delicate balance between allowing people to pray where they are, but also respecting, in particular, our residential neighborhoods and the impacts that may be felt there. So the specifics are distinguishing between different types and contexts, but also treat those evenly, creating thresholds, and then certain things that are common when we talk about zoning, signage, parking, and tying back to existing standards that exist for all other uses. So I'm going to throw it over to Karen to walk you through each of the different typologies of places of worship and some general things about them.
Sure. So just as a reminder, we currently just have the one-size-fits-all zoning right now. So the community places of worship permitted in the AA, A, or B district is a conditionally permitted use. It can also be conditionally permitted in the multifamily and the commercial and in a planned residential development. They require a large setback. For example, they're supposed to have a 50-foot setback on the front and on the sides also, and 50 feet from the building to the rear property line. Now, their parking lots are allowed to be in the rear, 10 feet from their neighbor, but everything else is supposed to have a 50-foot setback from all the way around, which if you think about our Cleveland Heights community, the likelihood of that ever happening in today's world is remote at best. So the square footage that's required is 10,000 square feet or more. And so it's not meant to fit into the neighborhood. It's really supposed to be a structure and a site that really draws your attention to it so that it's very visible and grand. So this is a good example that we're looking at. And that was the intent, back in, years ago when maybe labor was a little bit more affordable and construction costs were more reasonable and you could build something grand like this. They can be tall. It does allow accessory uses in the building and on the grounds. For example, often they have a wing where they may do some education, or they may have a school attached to it, or sometimes they have a nonprofit that's providing some type of service. Parking uses remain the same as they are, but a parking plan would be required. So as we looked at our new code, we were gonna require that of some of the other use typologies. We thought everybody should be the same. So if we're asking for a parking plan and how that fits into the neighborhood of one of these typologies, we should ask that of each of our typologies. And a landscape plan's required, and we have an entire section in our zoning code talking about landscaping and how you should landscape a property. And then this also ties into this the social functions and into the fire code, so that you have to do that. So within the meeting room, as you heard, is often it's just a smaller congregation. They can't afford these larger churches or synagogues that we just were talking about, and so they wanted a smaller space. And we already had something in our zoning code called a meeting room, which is just a room where people get together and talk. So it could be about a book or it could be about their faith. So it really fit into that need of, if a church wanted to meet in there, it really was no different than what a meeting room would be. It's a group of people coming together in a specific location, having a discussion or a prayer, whatever that might be. So then this is the new typology that we're recommending, and it would be a neighborhood place of worship that would be permitted in the single family and two family districts. It would be conditionally permitted in a planned residential development. So it would have 10,000 square feet or less as a structure. There's distinguishes in the codes about whether it was a corner lot or a lot that's in the middle of your block. And the idea is that it has to be contextual, so that the structure should fit into the neighborhood. It's not intended to be that grand structure that we see in the other typology. This is really supposed to fit into the neighborhood and complement what's there.
So it can be in the middle of the street or in the corner.
Correct. And there's some rules about which siting you're in. So there's setbacks are tied to height. So the taller you are, the further you have to be set back from your property lines. There's limited signage in these. There's needs to be a parking plan as well as and some parking that is required. As we were saying, there's specific standards for non-corner lots. Landscaping again would be required, as well as they would be allowed to have some social functions tied to what the fire code would permit in these structures.
So I'll speak to this. So parking is probably the biggest challenge that we have. We spoke about this the other day in the housing committee meeting about a different type of use, but parking, particularly in our residential neighborhoods, is a big concern. And there are different expectations when it comes between these different typologies, because the community place of worship is really a place where people are driving to. They tend to have parking lots that they can have on site. It still may not be enough to handle, Sunday worship or a large event. But the neighborhood places of worship are meant to be in the neighborhood where people are walking at least as much as possible. But we needed to create a standard that applied equally to both of those. So as Karen had mentioned, in the proposed legislation is the requirement that the parking plan or a statement be prepared by the applicant. And we're proposing to add in additional language that says that that's before it even gets to the planning commission, it gets reviewed by the zoning administrator with the police department and the fire inspector. Because ultimately, emergency access is the main concern when it comes to parking, right? If you're blocking up the street or blocking up the driveway, then the police can't get there or an ambulance can't get there. So making sure that there's enough access for rigs to fight a fire or somebody to respond to an emergency. Once that review happens, that's also part of the Planning Commission's review, and they do this routinely when they have conditionally permitted uses. They look at the parking conditions and the traffic conditions. I can add conditions onto that. We had an example at the Planning Commission at the last meeting of a car wash, and there had been some particular traffic issues related to it. So the Planning Commission added a condition that traffic should be discussed with the police chief, et cetera, signage should be added. So that's the power of a conditional use, is it gives the Planning Commission a case-by-case ability to apply a condition that may make sense in that case.
Okay.
And that's that third bullet. And a good thing also about adding these as conditional uses is that if they're just not following the approval, then that use or that place of worship could be called back to the planning commission for an additional review. And we do this, we have the ability to do this for any conditional use. So often, sometimes there are, let's say, automotive uses that are not following any of the rules. We can say, hey, your permit can be revoked if you don't follow the rules.
Okay.
Neighborhood places of worship, just to give a more specific information there. So the off-street parking is the underlying district parking. So if it's a residential, single-family residential use, that is the required parking. If it's a commercial use, that would be the required parking. That is intentional because if you think about it on some of our residential lots, if we ask them to provide, one parking space for every 4 seats, then that would take up the entire lot. You wouldn't be able to provide enough parking on site in a neighborhood. And parking can become the bane of our existence, especially from a planning point of view. So we anticipate that there's going to be on-street parking, and that parking just needs to be managed and enforced. And that's where this review by police and fire really comes in. For the community place of worship, one of the comments that we'll talk about in a second is that our standards are outdated in terms of off-street parking requirements for them. And so we're proposing now in this amended version to revise that from 1 per 4 seats to 1 per 8 seats. And we'll talk about why that's a good idea, or why we think that's a good idea. Just to highlight the public comment on this, so we've had this up on the website since it was introduced in council about a month ago. And that includes the FAQ, which has all those questions and answers. It's very clear from the website that they should send their emails send it to our planning@clevelandheights.gov email. As of, it's not 5 p.m., as of whatever it is, 10:30 a.m., we only had 1 written comment related to this, which was supportive, but asking about some additional changes that could be made for the community places of worship. We know that there was a set of comments when you had the first reading, but it's been really, really limited in terms of what we're hearing about this. That may be different than what you're hearing, but at least in terms of formal comments, there's only really 1 formal comment.
And one would expect that in a public hearing, you
Exactly.
might hear a boatload.
Which is why we want to sort of get to that public hearing sooner than later. So what are those public comments? The couple that were at that first reading, first one was related to tax implications of it. Hey, we're going to take all these residential properties and make them tax exempt. Well, first important point is just like we don't in our zoning say, this has to be a rental unit versus a home owner occupied unit, zoning doesn't deal with tax exempt status. It's just not part of that purview. We wanted to highlight, of course, is that we do have this really fabulous not-for-profit culture here in Cleveland Heights, and that contributes to our diversity. So that's something that we've, as a community, made a decision that we do want not-for-profits here. But in actuality, it's not that big of a concern. There's very limited amount of properties that this might even apply to. We know that congregations are not necessarily growing in sizes, they're shrinking in sizes, but they're looking for the right places to locate. So to think that all of a sudden 100 properties are going to turn over, we don't believe is going to happen. But even if that were the case, we just wanted to give you an example of a $200,000 property would reduce the pool of property value by whatever percentage that is. My math isn't good enough, which is equivalent to 47 cents additional burden per household per year. A second comment is the focus should be on adaptive reuses of existing sacred spaces. Absolutely. That's a big part of what we talk about in our zoning code and believe in. But the reality is that unfortunately many of those spaces are too large for the congregations, and the former church on Cedar that is now Horizon. What was the name of that prior? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, no, I don't remember, sorry.
But that's an example of how no church could continue to use that space because it's just so large, but it's a great office space. And a lot of this is based on maintenance, deferred maintenance. And so, yes, adaptive reuse, absolutely, but it's not a silver bullet. And The third, which is the actual comments that we got in writing, were a closer look should be given to the community places of worship. So we're just gonna run through their comments and show how we're proposing to amend it, and then where we're not, why we're not. So this included the yard setbacks for community places of worship and school facilities should be reduced. It's part of what Karen had highlighted, that when you've got 50-foot setbacks, that's almost impossible to accomplish in Cleveland Heights nowadays, but 25 feet made a lot more sense, and particularly if there's landscaping that's associated with that. Permitting schools in residential districts, including daycare, in addition to daycare centers and preschools. And that's just really a wording issue, because right now, those are both permitted in our residential districts as accessory or complementary to places of worship, but schools themselves are not highlighted, so we're suggesting or agreeing to add that in. Increase the maximum impervious coverage for a community place of worship from 60 to 80%. This was a question of equity a little bit, because the neighborhood places of worship are proposed at 70%. And so we think that was valid, that those two should at least be equal, and that it could even go higher if there's stormwater management on site, which would be reviewed by the zoning administrator. The reason why we're proposing that for the community place of worship and not the neighborhood place of worship is, for a small lot, you wouldn't be able to provide really stormwater management on it. But one of the advantages of a large parcel is you could do that. So that seemed to us to be a real valid way of addressing that. Clarify that the principal use can include gatherings and activities related to worship. The previous language was a little bit too restrictive, so this loosened it up to say that, if people are coming there and it's not necessarily just to pray, but to have a social function related to the congregation, that should be permitted, and we definitely agreed. There was some additional language or removing language about social functions being tied to the place of worship. And we didn't recommend removing that language because we know that parking is a big issue. So if that's not something that's under consideration by the planning commission, it's going to be hard for us to enforce. Including very specifically a coffee house as an accessory use, absolutely, it's something that we could see very much being part of a community place of worship sort of function. Revising language.
Inside of the place of worship.
Inside the place of worship, yeah. So it wouldn't be, hey, Starbucks build a site on here. It would be something that the congregation or somebody affiliated with the congregation would run. Revised language regarding purpose of community place of worship. That again is just trying to align it with what we're saying with our neighborhood places of worship. Remove the required landscaping plan. Well, obviously, we weren't in favor of that, because first of all, it's something that we're requiring for the neighborhood place of worship, but actually for all of our developments in the city. That's really important to people, that they're landscaped properly. Revising signage to allow for signs on both fronts, so not just the primary front, but even on a side street for uses that end up on a corner lot. It's important for a place of worship because often people are coming from that secondary street. And then going back to the parking standard, the request, and we agreed, is to change this standard from 1 per 4 seats to 1 per 8 seats. And part of the reason is because
Say that again, please.
so for a community place of worship, it would be, right now, it's 1 parking space per every 4 seats. And this seats, so yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if there are 40 seats in the church, then there are 10 spaces. This would be halving that essentially. Why? Because people aren't necessarily coming to church or to the synagogue the way that they used to in the 50s and the 60s. Everybody piled in the car. So it's a little bit different way people are walking more often. The services have smaller attendance. And so loosening that up to actually reflect what we've done in our commercial districts as well, which is, the reliance upon the car is still necessary, but not as great as it used to be. So that's why we're supporting it.
So signage for parking would be on the residential street as well as.
So it's just signage in general. So yeah, this would permit it to occur on both streets if it's a corner lot. So let's say, for example, St. Anne, right? That's Coventry. Well, Coventry is also a busy street, but Coventry and and Cedar, so both sides could have a sign.
And there would be designated parking for,
Not parking, that's just signage.
oh, just signage,
Yeah, so
okay.
signage like, hey, here's the name of the trip.
Oh, okay.
So if it's okay, I just wanted to throw it over to the planning chair here to talk about their resolution, which is a super resolution. And you don't need to go into the details.
Yeah, I mean, the resolution's on that. No, I mean, we've been reviewing this for a number of years and there's been, the advantages from the planning commission perspective, which I think Director Zale touched on, is that if we have this in the code or when we have this in the code, we can then regulate it, right, through conditional use permits. Right now, particularly neighborhood places of worship are not in the code at all. So if there are issues, whether it's parking or neighbors, are concerned that there's a religious place of worship, on their street, there's no recourse for them to come to the city and say, hey, I don't like the fact that someone's parking in front of my house, every week on Sunday all day or in the evenings. And so we think in addition to all the reasoning that the planning department has in terms of, just right sizing our code for the way that worship happens today, this actually gives the planning commission and therefore the city an anchor and a lever to use when we have places of worship and neighbors want to come with concerns. So I think there's the advantage of the positive advantage, right? The proactive advantage of creating this space in the code for the way that people worship today. And then a reactive opportunity and for us as a city to say, we have a code, this is what needs to be followed. And as we have with other businesses and other, situations where conditional use permits were not complied with or not followed, we can ensure that it is. And I think that that's an important lever because an implied point is that the changes to the way people worship, it's happening, it's already happened. That's happening right now. And so we need to be able to work with that and be able to respond to that as necessary.
I'll just add that you'll see in this resolution, which is.
Do we have a copy of it?
You do have a copy, I think it's also in the packet specifically for today, but what they did recommend is the ordinance as amended, as proposed to be amended, which is also part of your packet. So you'll see in a second, that's gonna be part of our recommendation. Just to talk about the process for a second and to remind everybody, so this is chapter 1119 of our code, and these are the steps. Introduction at council, you did it on the 4th, referral to the planning commission also on the 4th. They held their meeting and recommendation on the 13th. While not required per our code, this has been the practice of the city ever since I've been here, is referral of these things to the committee of council, which is today. And then the next step is that public hearing and then ultimately action by council. So that public hearing is that immediate next step. But you'll see there's all these opportunities for people to weigh in. And so we just want to sort of get to the next steps in our recommendation. You'll see in the code that what it says, I'll just read it for clarity's sake. At the time of transmission of the amending ordinance to the planning commission, notice of the public hearing shall be given. So that hasn't happened yet, and I think you were probably waiting for this meeting to happen first, but it's in there. We've got to give people time, give the clerk of council time to set the hearing. I know there are some folks here today that are supportive of it, and we know there are other people who are supportive, and there might be people who aren't. We just haven't heard from them yet. So really getting that public hearing is really, really important. So our recommendation after our discussion is that you return this legislation as suggested to be amended by the planning commission to council for the scheduling of the public hearing. It would be great if that could happen on the 15th of April, which is the next meeting. And that would give the greatest participation by both public and council because people tend to pay attention and show up to council meetings. I did want to, it's not on a slide here, it's a discussion, but I did want to address specifically, I think something that the council president is going to bring up, but just talk for a second, and we have law here to talk about the Religious Land Use Protection Act, which is a federal act, RLUPA as it's termed, and just make a statement that we were intentionally here trying to be proactive so that we are in greater compliance. and of Arlupa and its goals and missions. So that's why, this is trying to really give religious uses more opportunities in our city, not less. Often, and if you do a Google search for zoning changes in the country, often they're trying to restrict them. And that's where the federal government had to step in and say, you can't do that. But our intention here was absolutely the opposite. And I think we really saw that with the Beechwood and University Heights discussions. And just, I don't know if you have any words to add to that.
I had a question. So with respect to the coffee house, would there be a component where they would have to seek a secondary permit for the sale of food or beverages or anything?
There would be sort of our business occupancy.
And is that built into?
That's not zoning. So
Okay. So
standard operating procedures.
Chair.
Yes.
So Jessica, what you were talking about from the planning commission perspective, does Arlupa, would we be out of compliance if we did, actually, let me just ask this to everybody, because I need to kind of like get this big picture thing before I do have some specific questions. Would Arlupa supersede if we do nothing? Because obviously we could do something, we could do a modified something, or we could do nothing. Those are the choices. Can we do nothing, or does Arlupa mandate that we do something? Or in a sense, would Arlupa supersede us doing nothing and then kick in,
Well,
if there was a complaint or something like
my
that?
understanding is that it would not allow you to take away rights as opposed to granting rights, right? So if you have a secular use, you have to at least meet that standard. So if a church wants to provide a certain function, if there's a secular use, you have to meet that at least. So I think it sets a bottom floor as opposed to granting rights, if that makes sense.
Look, just practically,
Mhm.
if someone wants to have a neighborhood place of worship now, my understanding from the conversations that we've had is that if it's a problem in the neighborhood and we say, we don't want you to have a neighborhood place of worship, that we being the city, they can say, well, we're gonna sue you under Arlupa and we're allowed to have a neighborhood place of worship here. But that's to my point about having administrative levers or, our city to have oversight over it. They can have it there. And then if the neighbors say, hey, if somebody's parking on my street every day, or they're blocking the stop sign at the corner and I can't drive through, the city can't do anything because we don't have anything in the code restricting that. And so this gives us the framework within which to say, we're not, to Director Zam's point, we're proactively saying, you can have your neighborhood place of worship here, but this is the framework within which we want to structure it.
I get that, but I'm saying, is our zoning code accidentally discriminating by not having anything in there allowing this?
Well,
Silence on it, it's
I think the objective should be to set a standard, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what the zoning code will do. So I think staying
I'm
silent.
talking about the present zoning,
Right,
with.
right.
Okay.
Right, so
a non-legal, so we have two lawyers with it.
Yeah.
A non-legal response, I think, from our point of view is that we know that the norms have changed. And
Right.
our zoning code does not reflect that. So I would say in sort of an accidental way, not an intentional way, but an
Right.
accidental way, since we haven't updated our code, it puts us in danger of being set up for people to invoke our loop. And so that's why we're taking this proactive approach, especially because we really do honor the diversity of creed and worship here, and we want to make it as welcoming. So it's reacting to that in a way, but it's also just saying this is what we're all about here.
Okay.
So how do we address the freedom concerns and protect the freedom concerns of religion, but also address the concerns of residents far as noise, parking, and traffic. Because we had someone who talked about that at the very last council meeting, not pertaining to this, but a resident talked about noise in a church that was 300 feet away from his home, and he felt it was a violation to his personal well-being and space. So how do we protect
Yeah.
the place of worships and religion, but also the concerns of the residents as well?
And that's a great point, because this is all about balance, you know, balancing this freedom of religion, but also you know, the quality of life of people, particularly in our residential neighborhoods. And that's why it's actually really important what we're doing, because right now it's just a noise complaint. So the noise is too loud, PD, police department gets called out, the noise might be done by the time they get there. But if we make it a conditionally permitted use, so now the planning commission has oversight over this. And if there's 1 or 2 or 3 incidents of calls, now the planning commission can come along and say, you know, you're not meeting the standard that we've set here. Because our conditional use regulations for all conditional uses, one of the standards is, you know, that you're
Not injurious to the.
right, and
Right.
noise, I think, is called out very specifically. So this gives us that tool, particularly for noise, but also for parking or any other impactful things that can be reviewed, number one, but then enforced, number 2. So we think it really gives us that tool that we don't have today.
Go ahead.
So on the tax exempt status, my understanding is nonprofits have to, I understand it's not part of the zoning code. Nonprofits go to this federal government and apply for this status, and it's up to the federal government to award that. So I know there are people in this city that don't believe that religious institutions should be tax exempt, but it's very clear that we are not the ones to arbitrate that.
Right.
So given that, again, if we did nothing, could these neighborhood religious places of worship that are already in place but operating without a zoning code change, could they apply for that status now?
And that occurs.
Okay,
So it's,
so
again,
that's something they could do whether we pass something or we don't pass something.
now, I'm not a tax
I understand.
expert. I'm probably somewhere in the tax code that says that they probably shouldn't be able to do that, but whether the county or the state or the federal government, you know, again, it's not under our control, and we know that these places do already exist.
Actually, isn't that related back to the county though? Because it's the owner of the
Right.
property, so they would have to make sure that the owner of the property is the nonprofit
I see.
itself.
And then on the flip side, we know that there are some properties that are not just religious, but not-for-profits, and they haven't applied for that status for whatever reason, so it's not a universal thing that happens.
Okay. I just want to be able to answer that question.
Right. And I think we can, you know, for the public hearing, we can also just dig into it a little bit more and give you
Yeah.
a solid answer.
Great.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. So for the community place of worship, I'm looking at the memo. These are permitted as a right in the single family and the 2-family zoning districts, and then conditionally permitted in our other districts. And right now, are they conditionally permitted in our single family?
No, they are, that's not a change to where they're permitted. And we didn't want to touch that because that, I think, would create a higher burden than exists today.
And the neighborhood place of worship, is that a conditional use in all situations in the single family and 2-family zoning districts?
Yes.
So there's no exceptions for that.
Right.
And they would have to come to planning commission
Okay.
for a conditional use permit
Yes.
to exist.
All right. Do we have any estimate now as to how many neighborhood places of worship are existing currently?
Well, I'll answer it in a roundabout way. I think we have about 50 places of worship in town. And I would say 10 of those we probably would put in this category without having actually done analysis of neighborhood place of worship. That includes, you know, some places that are within other places of worship, meaning that if they had the opportunity to be somewhere else, they would be somewhere
Right.
else. So it's probably a fifth of the overall are these places.
Okay, and do we, as a result of these zoning changes, do we anticipate there being a growth in the number of neighborhood places, or do we think it'll stay close to where it is right now?
We think that there would be a slight growth, but those 10 first would come into compliance, which is what we're looking for. And, you know, there likely would be a few additional ones, but we haven't heard a clamor of, you know, all of a sudden there's gonna be 100 more of these. And some communities in the US, that's a possibility, but it's not something we're seeing here in Cleveland Heights.
Those were my questions, thanks.
Tony?
I'm looking at the Beechwood building setback. It's the record 112404B B1. It says for building conversions, the existing building setback may be maintained for all new buildings constructed. So it basically that sounds like grandfathering to me. And then for all new buildings constructed, front building setback shall not be less than, and then it's 75 feet is crossed off and it's 50 as measured from the street right-of-way line. And then it talks about side and rear being 20, it depends. Anyway. So what did you think? Did you look at this? I
Absolutely,
assume.
yes.
And what did you, I mean, I'm not commenting on the 75 feet, that's what they have in there, I mean, that's their business, but they felt like 50 feet was reasonable.
So if they have the videos of the meetings, and this was a big point of
And I didn't watch
contention. There was a lot of pushback on that very specific standard on both sides, but thinking about the way that Beechwood is written down.
Yeah.
If I were their planner, you know, a 50-foot setback actually sort of fits into the context of how most buildings in Beechwood are. Cleveland Heights is a different story. I mean, even when you think about some of our established places of worship, they're within that 50 feet already. So while I think,
Within which,
meaning less than 50 feet
okay,
here in Cleveland Heights. So I don't think that's an awful standard for them, but it's not something that applies here. And you can see they actually decreased it from where it had originally started.
yeah.
For that very reason. But yeah, if you want to see a contentious debate, watch those Beechwood meetings about their ordinance.
So in 112407, and I'm only saying these numbers because if somebody's listening, they want to look it up, have at it. They talk about it's off-street parking and loading facilities shall be provided in conformance with, and then they say 1144, but so they're not changing it. I thought that was interesting. I'm assuming they're not changing it.
They're not changing it, but it's an important point to make is that they are not creating this new typology of neighborhood place of worship. So they are really,
Well, they're not, but in the intent,
they may say it in their intent.
yeah, this chapter is to provide regulations for the operation, expansion, and maintenance of existing educational, religious, and cultural. So, I mean, I'm a layperson. I'm just
Sure.
looking at this and I'm trying to make sense.
Yeah, they are, I guess, in their own way,
Yes.
trying to deal with those types of uses, but it's not necessarily apples to apples compared to us. I'll just give an example of the very controversial synagogue in University Heights. If you've driven by there recently, which is it's University Heights and I don't know the cross.
Milton?
Milton, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll see that that's a very large site. So even though it's in a residential neighborhood, it's a very large site. That's not even what we're trying to accomplish here, because that will be something that looks very different than everything that surrounds it. We're really trying to get into the context here because we know we're a city of neighborhoods, and that's really important.
So you don't consider, but getting back to the parking part, you don't consider Beechwood really trying to address this, what we're trying to address.
Correct.
Okay, so that, I couldn't get that by reading this, but,
Yeah.
okay.
So the enforcement and compliance will be through the police?
Not necessarily. So a big tool, a big stick that we'll have will be the planning commission. So what we do as the planning staff is we say, we've gotten a complaint, here's your plan, here's your approval. And if you don't do this, we're gonna monitor that for the next month. If you don't do that, then we're gonna bring it back to the planning commission. Of course, a person can always call up the police department for noise or for a parking issue or some other issue. But this is a better stick in this sort of setting.
And the
So, I'm sorry.
okay, and the resources and support available to the religious organizations to navigate through the zone process, how will the religious place of worship understand the rights and their responsibilities?
We're gonna reach out again, but should this pass to each and every place of worship, and particularly those that are these neighborhood places of worship. And, we're there to walk them through. It's not something that people understand all that well. But that's why we've been giving people opportunities like our guests here to have a chance to learn about it a little bit. We'll create, an not an FAQ, but maybe a one-pager that people can use. But we really want people to essentially call us up and we'll walk them through the process. We want compliance. That's the ideal.
Go ahead, Tony.
So I want to address something Commissioner Judy Miles brought up. But first, let me make sure I understand this 10,000 square foot. Is it up to 10,000 square feet for a new building in a residential district? Up to,
Yes.
okay. So her concern, which her concern was if people move into a neighborhood because they like the way it feels, and that would, a 10,000 square foot structure would be quite a change. We're talking about there'd have to be several contiguous lots, I would assume. I don't know what it would take to put a 10,000 square foot. I mean, how many, like average lots, but in the unlikely event, as they say when you're flying, that there was a possibility to do something like that, how would the zoning requirements, we're talking about the balance thing, that's the integrity of the neighborhood and people's right to worship. How would that balance out if you had, neighbors just saying, no, we don't want this, we don't want the traffic, we don't want the parking problems, we don't want a big structure on here, that's not why we moved here.
So I think she did ask this at the planning commission meeting, and the answer we gave there, which we'll give again, is that we have the safeguard of the planning commission having to approve the lot joining. So if there happens to be a lot somewhere in a residential district that's already exists, then that,
Contiguous lots.
but if it's contiguous lots, then we don't allow in our zoning, in our building code, buildings to be built over lot lines. So a part of the process is a lot, it's called a lot consolidation. So they have to come, and we usually do this at the same time as a conditional use, is consolidate your lots, and then here's your building. So Cedar Lee Meadowbrook, for example, there were 20 lots or something like that. They applied to have all those combined into one, and then they could go ahead with the project. So we spoke about this at the planning commission meeting, is that that's the opportunity for the planning commission to say, this lot that you're proposing to create is not gonna fit into the community. It's actually not even related to the use. It's saying that, we've got a 4,000 square foot lot, and now all of a sudden we have a 20,000 square foot lot that you're proposing to create. That doesn't fit this neighborhood.
Well, it sounds like you best not say, refer to a religious institution in that case, because now you could be getting into a constitutional issue.
But we're not, I don't think we're able to consider the use.
But we don't need to.
Right.
We wouldn't.
Okay,
Yeah. So we think the safeguard is already sort of built in.
okay.
But yeah, I would definitely argue that we shouldn't add anything to the zoning that says something like that, because that would then become a burden that we're putting on religious uses that we're not doing elsewhere.
Right.
So are you saying that if there was a place of worship established in a residential area and there's a vacant lot next to a home or someone who just deemed this as a place of worship, they could purchase the lot next door and maybe make it a parking lot?
I think what the council president is saying is that somebody might come along and purchase a bunch of lots that are adjacent to each other to be able to create a very large
I was talking
parcel.
about building something,
Yeah.
but your question, I'd like to hear the answer to your question.
So we do have limitations currently in our code, Karen can speak to it, about accessory parking to an adjacent use. And it's something actually we're looking at modifying further. This came up in the context of sometimes we have accessory parking lots in residential districts that are serving our commercial districts. And at a certain point, it gets to a point that's too far into that residential district. So we want to limit that. But again, we should do that. We're going to do that comprehensively, not just for a very specific use in this case.
Okay, I'm not sure if I heard the answer.
So the answer is that there's a limitation right now on parking within residential districts, particularly for adjacent uses. So
For a lot, if you buy.
you have a garage and a driveway for your home.
Mhm.
You know, if there is a multifamily building, there's a parking lot associated with that. But you can't just have, McDonald's wants to have a parking lot, 20 lots in for its use. And so that's already built into our code, but we're also looking at revising that, not as part of this, but as part of a more global look to make sure that those safeguards are even better for our entire city.
I think your question though is a little different
Mhm.
because she was saying if a residential
Home.
home is being used for this religious,
Well,
Worship.
you have the limitation on impervious surfaces. So.
And what is it?
I think what it was,
70%.
70%. So you wouldn't be able to pave over an entire lot and put a parking lot there.
But even the parking lot, again, this comes to the conditional use, like a parking lot in a residential district is not something we
And-
encourage.
And they would have to, as part of the conditional use permit, they would have to work on the parking plan. And so if they said, we're going to have, a 10-spot parking lot, or I don't know, 5-spot, parking lot, the planning department would say, that's not going to work.
Yeah, we have parking lot landscaping requirements, so on a standard parking lot, a standard single-family parcel, you wouldn't get very many parking spaces to begin with.
Mhm.
But because of the landscaping, and we don't allow parking in the front yard. So immediately that front yard of that parcel would be off limits for parking without a variance if they had to do that. But so some of that all plays into the practicality of, purchasing that next lot over for maybe, and parking lots are expensive, plus the landscaping, so it sometimes the economics of that just wouldn't pencil out.
Okay. No, I was just thinking, cause I can picture a street I'm looking at where a actual home is there. It's not a place of worship, but right next to it, there is a lot. And then next to that is an empty house. But the drive is right next to the actual empty lot, where if you say 4 spaces per, if it's 40 seats and that's 10 or whatever spaces you said, that maybe a person could actually cut off part of that space and try to pave it to make it a parking lot for a place of worship. So that's why I was asking.
But it would definitely be part of a planning commission review, and there need to be a lot joining, so like all those sort of typical.
the 70% rule would.
Right, and on top of this, we also always take into account public comment. I mean, we have had, to the extent that we legally can, and we have had, the public come on different cases. And I mean, we've seen big projects like the Hebrew Academy, Oakwood project completely turn their building around based on public comment, and things like that. And so there's other levers, in terms of just if there are concerns from neighbors,
Mhm.
that just is part of the process that we go through for a conditional use permit generally.
Mhm.
And so we take that into account. So even if none of these other safeguards or the other code pieces, you know, would prohibit that, that doesn't mean we have to necessarily allow it either.
Nothing.
Tony, anything?
Let's see. So in University Heights, neighbors started, this is according to, well, I guess I could say this. This is according to a conversation I had with the mayor. Neighbors gave leases for parking who lived adjacent to a place of worship.
That's not something that zoning deals with.
They do that in my dad had to lease a parking spot in Brooklyn where he taught for 30 years. I mean, it's pretty, it's private, right?
You know, I think it's one of the things that, part of the reason why we're asking for the plan, the parking plan, or parking statement at least, is, you know, for people to, on the record, state, this is our intention. And, you know, for example, if they say, hey, we plan on leasing out spaces for, you know, 20 people, that's part of the consideration that Planning Commission has, because that also impacts the neighborhood. So it's not a zoning issue, but it's a conditional use question that they can consider.
And if neighbor, I mean, again, this is a lever that we will have if neighbors are complaining and they say, listen, I see that so-and-so is leasing out these spots and now I have all these cars, they can come back to the city and we'll say, well, that wasn't part of your parking plan. So now we have to address that, whether they
Okay.
address it with the city or then if at some point the planning department says, we actually need to bring you back because you're in violation of your conditional use.
I mean, that's what I wanted to know. Do we have recourse? And you're saying yes.
This, I think, then that's really, for me and some of the other members, this is what it provides the city, is recourse for neighbors that have complaints.
This is not, the mayor's shaking his
We
head.
can talk about it.
Okay.
So if there's no more questions on this, or we don't need anything here, what I would like to do, if it's okay with you, to move this piece of legislation to the committee of the whole and have Eric come back and do the same presentation with all of council, because some council people were not able to come to this meeting or whatever, but I would love for the council itself to be able to hear exactly and them to be able to have the opportunity to ask questions as well.
Can I just make a request?
Sure.
Could we do that as part of a public hearing? The reason I say that is because it's gonna be the same presentation every single
It'll
time.
be 3 times, yeah, in this way. So if we vote to move this forward, let's just say, and it comes back to committee of the whole, and we set up the public hearing, is that when we're gonna set up the public hearing? I guess I should ask you, Madam.
So I was hoping, the request is that you set, or you give the authority to set the public hearing today, which will be a presentation. You guys can ask questions and then we can hear from the public. It's really, it gets that ball rolling. It doesn't have to complete that day.
But do you see what he's saying, in a sense that would be
I understand
also,
what he's saying.
that would be the committee of the whole presentation kind of combined with the public
I
hearing.
understand that.
Yeah.
But I know some questions that may be directed to the law director. He was not able to be here today.
Right.
And I did say to him that I would give the opportunity for him to be available to answer any questions that may be legal that people may want to ask. So I wanted to be able to do that.
Well, I think we should make sure that the law director is available on the public hearing day. At the very least, I mean, that would.
So we can get back to
Yeah,
yes.
I'm assuming the law department has already vetted this
Yes.
legislation.
Yes.
And hopefully that there aren't any legal concerns that the law department have been addressed with changes or corrections that
Correct.
have been made.
I wasn't talking about
Yeah.
the legal department itself.
I think maybe you should let the law director speak to that.
Yes.
So what would you like to do?
I just told you.
Say it again, please.
I would like to move it to the committee of the whole, so I know the law director would be there. So that if any other council people wanted to ask any questions, they had the opportunity to do so as well, so that it is vetted by all 6 council people, so they had the opportunity to ask their questions as well. And the law director is there if there's anything that he may want to add or questions that may be legal that the law department may need to answer for some of the council members. I want to give them the opportunity as well. Yes.
I think what Eric would like to have in connection with that, then go to the public hearing
I heard
aspect,
that.
okay?
I did hear that. I didn't address it.
So we're not gonna,
I didn't address it at this point. I still want to be able to, because I don't know what's on the agenda as of yet. So we still have a couple days that we could talk about a public hearing. Because you're meeting to go over the agenda on Friday, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, I just think if we put, I don't mean to be repetitive, but if we're gonna be able to do that before the public hearing starts, why not do it on the same day? Because it's still both things happen. In other words, we get to vet with the law director, because you'll be chairing, and if you want the audience to wait until we're done with our questions, we can do it that way. And then a public hearing happens. And then it's not 2 meetings, it's 1 meeting.
So President Kuda, you're the president of council. If you choose to have it that way, that's fine. I just gave you my recommendation.
Can I say though that if we're going to do it combined, we'd probably need an hour, not half an hour like we typically do for the public hearings, in which case it would start at 5 and I don't think you'd make it by 5. Just to put that out.
Okay, I understand that part of it, that's logistics, that's not what I was thinking about.
I was.
Okay.
I'm always thinking about
Yeah.
the timing that I can get. And it doesn't have to be the next.
You're the chair, I'm not asking you to defer to me, I'm just trying to figure out a way to do this as economically as possible.
And it doesn't mean that it has to be the 15th, it could be the 16th. You know what I'm saying? I'm not
Yeah.
saying any of those, but I know the 15th is gonna be very difficult.
Did you actually put up a date? I'm sorry, this might have
Well,
went
we put up the 15th just because that's your next meeting.
yeah,
But we're open to alternative additional dates.
I'm not gonna hold it.
Yeah.
Like.
so you want us to vote on the motion that you put forward, basically to have the law director come in?
And Eric and them don't have to do the presentation again, but at least let the council be able to ask their questions. And then when we do the public hearing, then he's not coming twice.
I'm fine with that.
whatever works that doesn't require Eric to give this presentation twice.
Well, it would be 3 times.
So he doesn't have to give it at the
Right,
committee of the
right.
whole.
We're just gonna play the video of this.
That's one thing that the council members could do.
Yeah, that's true. We could have Addie send the link to them, and at least, and that'll help them prepare for, a meeting with the law director.
Did you wanna try to do that during committee of the whole on the 15th or do a separate committee of the whole for it?
Committee of the whole on the 15th.
How much time would you like to set aside for that? Because what we're gonna have to
Can
consider.
we discuss that at our meeting with,
I mean,
so?
we could, just,
I'm not, because it's gonna be other things that's gonna be maybe put on the agenda, you don't know what the mayor has to put on the
Right.
agenda, we can actually time it out
okay.
like we normally do at that meeting.
So then I take it we're gonna just figure out after the committee of the whole meeting on April 15th when we wanna schedule the public
We
hearing.
can do that this week. We don't have to wait till the 15th to decide the public hearing. I'm just trying to refer it to the committee of the whole right
First.
now, yes.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
Thank you.
I'm fine with whatever you guys agree, just as long as he's,
Well,
It
tried
won't be
this
long.
for
It won't be long.
2 years, yeah.
Won't be long. It won't be long. Thank you. Okay, so to end that discussion, we will move forward to
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Have a good one.
This is your topic, sir. Council President, Council Economic Development Process. So I'm gonna turn this portion over to you to start the conversation.
Okay.
Or should, Eric, do you have some things on this as well?
We have a presentation, but I think it actually fits very well with what the council president is gonna say now or say later,
So
I-
should you do yours first and then go with,
whatever you think works best.
I don't wanna be redundant, so if maybe some things that you have may answer some of his questions or maybe going to his process then.
Well, what does the agenda say that, I mean, we should follow the agenda. If it says,
It doesn't, it says the topic,
yeah,
council economic development process. It
Well-
doesn't say who's going first or second.
well, I understand that, but I mean, if it's talking about, I mean, the topic is, if the topic is this, then I'll
Yes.
gladly do this. So, based on my 2 years and plus, I've seen some dramatically different processes used for, and this is in my view, okay? And it made me realize that council needs to understand what it is, or I don't even, not understand isn't even the right word. The council needs to adopt a process they're comfortable with so that we're all on the same page or as much as we can be. Because we need a roadmap for taking in the information, which is quite substantial in any kind of economic development agreement. So I put together a process that basically says that the administration, this is how it generally happens as far as I can tell. The administration puts a memorandum of understanding together, even if it's a land use. I look at that as a memorandum of understanding. Am I using the right terminology?
In some cases.
But I mean, if for instance, if somebody says there's a conditional use of public property, like for instance on the TWG project, it's not in the form of a memorandum of understanding, but that is the understanding that if a development agreement is reached, the sale of the property goes through. So that's some type of understanding that we're.
Sometimes it's a MOU, sometimes it's a letter of intent, and
Right,
sometimes it's a purchase agreement.
Right.
So we
I understand the different terminology. And then that's usually based after a RFP or similar process is introduced by the developer and and the administration. Legislation then is referred to the planning commission and eventually to the planning committee. And then council members examine. I believe that, and I'm more talking to the council people, I believe we should, whenever there's something that says that involves public property, that we should examine the property before we vote. I'm talking about before we vote on anything. Something comes to us and it's preliminary in the sense of of what a memorandum of understanding is. And then I believe that we should do some type of public engagement so that we have an understanding of where the public is on the potential, in this case, the potential land use. And then the committee of the whole should review all this information in a public discussion. And then we should vote on an MOU. And then the administration and or the developer has public engagement opportunities where council is informed, because there were, in the case of the first WT, we didn't know about the public engagement. And we really believe we should know about all public engagement that's being done. And then we usually get the periodic updates of the development in executive session. I would strongly suggest, and this would never be mandatory, that council, especially the planning committee members, I would say especially, but not necessarily only, attend the ABR and planning commission meetings where important decisions are being made. And then if they're called back, we should be there to see if the revisions are indeed requested. One of the things with the initial TWG project was when I went to the planning commission meeting and the ABR meeting, I saw members of the staff going, no, this didn't happen. And I really didn't like the idea of voting on, you know, stuff to be done later. Because that's what ends up happening when that's the part where I had the most discomfort. When we were asked to vote because the argument seems to be the developer isn't gonna go to the finish line and spend all that money before council votes on a development agreement. That's too much to ask. But, you know, this gets back to the balancing act, which is, can council see a developer go into the planning commission and the architectural board of review multiple times, not meet the standards, and still on faith say, well, you know, I hope the administration will make these things happen, and the planning commission and the ABR and maybe the BZA, depending on, you know, what the issues are later on, or you know, and we have to figure out what we're comfortable with. I understand that. But, you know, and I understand, and by the way, I wanna just ask, do all development agreements include a site plan?
Not necessarily.
Not
Depends on-
necessarily, but they could.
they could.
Okay. And that was just a question I had along the way. And then, you know, obviously at that point, when we're all comfortable, we vote. So I just want to make sure that we have some expectations on council and that the administration understands they're under no obligation to meet those expectations, but that there are things that we're looking for as a city council. As council president, I certainly want to make sure that we've done everything we can to be well informed about any potential economic development projects, and that we're fully prepared to vote on something with all the information we need. So that's why I wrote this up, and I'm certainly willing to hear anything the committee members have to say, or
Well, I would actually like to hear the step process from the director to find out exactly what the step process is, and then go from there.
And so thank you for this opportunity. You'll see that we worked on this completely independently of each other. There was no notes trading, but a lot of what we want to talk about is exactly what the council president had in his words and what he wrote up and what the chair is saying. And so here's just an agenda of things we want to talk through. This is, you'll see something that I am happy to, and in fact want to do in a more public setting. This is a public meeting, but you know, maybe it's at a committee of the whole, because there's a lot of value in what we need to talk about today. And you know, make it a little bit fun, but you know, so we know there's some like basic things that the development process is a complicated one. It's not straightforward. Most people don't understand the nuances of it. In fact, when I first started here in 2021, and I did a bunch of meet and greets, you know, which were on mobile and on Lee Road, most people I spoke to assumed that one of two things: either council approves every single thing in the city and they've never even heard of the planning commission, or the planning director approves everything. And of course, all of that is far from the truth. And so I think we want to educate people about the process, the steps, and all the talented people that you guys appoint to these boards and commissions. Ultimately, clarity and certainty are the key things here, because you know, not only do developers need to know what to expect when they walk into town, and I think you know we heard this at the first meeting that you had, but also everybody else, right? You need to understand what's expected of you. Certainly the public needs to know when to show up, the right time to show up, and of course the staff. And all these things cost money. And, just I wanna underline a point there that often the more time we take on things, it doesn't actually result in a better result because the costs that went into preparing for that come out at the back end. So, it's a part of the balance that we need to really discuss. And I think the chair, the president mentioned this, and this is really important, that there's a big distinction between city-owned property and larger projects and everything else that we deal with. We have so many people coming through who are changing out windows in their home. You guys have no interest, I assume, in being involved in that. But when the city owns property and we're giving that over to a developer, then you absolutely have a big role in that. So the goals that I was hoping to have today, which I think fall right in line with what the president was saying, is to sort of level set and educate everybody about the process of the rules, identify some ways to improve that and maybe get some clarity on who does what. And then create this social contract, that's the word I'm using, but what's the agreement that we have? What's the expectation that we all have for council's role, the committee's role, developers' expectations for engagement, et cetera. So here are two flowcharts from communities in California. And I'm using this on purpose. So we don't have something like this here in Cleveland Heights, and I want to have one. But one is valuable. One, I think, is something that anybody can look at and ascertain what the steps are. And the other one might have all the information on the left, but I can't even understand what they're trying to say there. So we need to have a very clear process for something that in some ways is not clear, right? Development is case by case. But it doesn't mean we can't identify those 7 or 10 or whatever they are steps that are very clear to people. And so you'll see in the end, one of our outcomes of this is we want to come up with a graphic exactly like that. So let's talk about roles and start with the Department of Planning Development. That's obviously us. We're the first point of contact. This is an important point I want to make, is that developers or even just plain old applicants, they need a place to start. And the place to start is with us. They need to understand, do I even need to come to the city for this request? Or, how long is this going to take? And we can help to sort of get them right-sized and on the path. We have technical expertise. I've got the organizational chart there, which nobody can read.
I was gonna say, it's very little.
But the point is, we are people who went to school for this, and we do this in our everyday lives. The example I wanted to give, or the analogy is, you wouldn't go to your dentist to do your taxes. Your dentist might do his own taxes, and he may know how to do taxes, but you still wouldn't go there. So in the same way, every member of our community brings something to the table, and you guys bring something to the table that's on council, but we're the ones who are, this is our career. So we're really there to help an application through the process. We do provide recommendations. There's certain things we approve. On engagement efforts, that really is our job, and we handle complaints and enforcement. A lot of what we were talking about before is, coming through our department. And then comprehensive and neighborhood planning is the Department of Planning and Development. But then we've got these great bodies here, and then we'll get to you guys in a second. So we've got the Planning Commission, the Architectural Board of Review, the Board of Zoning Appeals, Landmark Commission, Board of Control. So the first 4 of those are all boards that you appoint. And they have varying memberships, and appointments, lengths. And that's something to consider, as we go forward. But you have the control over the people who are making these types of decisions. Planning Commission, they look at the overall site plan and zoning for a project. They deal with conditional uses. They are established by the city charter, and actually in Ohio Revised Code, you basically have to have a planning commission, if nothing else. Architectural Board of Review is established in our building code. They look at the look of a project. They're made up of architects primarily, and they are an important part, particularly for our community, because we know that the look and the context is really important. The Board of Zoning Appeals, that's established in our zoning code. They're quasi-judicial, meaning that they make decisions that are like a court. And those are variances primarily, and there is a distinction in there between a area variance, like a side yard setback, and a use variance. And Karen reminded me that that's the point to mention, that use variances actually are approved by the BZA and then they come to council. So that's because that's a big decision. That's going against what our zoning code says, and so that's like a policy decision. Landmark Commission, they look at our local landmarks and districts, changes to those, designating them. We've got a process going now to update their ordinance. The Board of Control, which is everything in Seventh Town Center, and that's membership based upon the mayor, members of council, the planning commission, the Board of Zoning Appeals. So you don't make appointments to that board. Then there's other boards and commissions that we have in the city, like the newly created Mobility Commission or Committee and the Transportation Committee. So seeing how they fit into this process is sort of up for debate right now. They should be able to offer comments. And I don't think anybody understands how they could offer comments at this moment in time. City Council, obviously, you don't have a formal review in the design review process. That's left up to all those other boards. But when it comes to public property purchase agreements, MOUs, whatever we want to call them, development agreements, that's you guys. And you need to have enough information to be able to make those decisions. And then if there's financing, so if there's private property, like we have, an existing private property that's looking for some help, that's, again, something that you have to consider. So those are areas where you do get involved. I highlighted the Planning and Development Committee because it's a question of sort of what's the role of the committee. As the president said, the committee receives all the development materials for our boards and commissions and is encouraged to attend meetings. Former Councilman Unger had mentioned at the last meeting that he sort of took us up on the offer every once in a while. But I think we want to reiterate that offer, that that's definitely your job and your role is to pay attention to those things. We give them to you on purpose. The mayor, we've got him on here, a strong mayor form of government, no formal role in design or review, actually doesn't even approve any of these things, but is really the ambassador to the community and brings forth legislation. And then, of course, the public is so important, and their job is to comment on a project at the appropriate time. That's why it's underlined. Coming to the council to talk about an approval that the Landmark Commission is giving on something, that's really not the appropriate place. But it's, of course, where people end up showing up. So that's part of what we want to do here, is really educate people to say, show up to the right board, because that's where your input is really going to be valuable. I wanted to just make a note here. This is something that's a bit, controversial, I'd say, here in Cleveland Heights, is our neighborhood associations, homeowners associations, condo associations. Those are just like the public. They don't receive any special treatment. There's, we can't enforce their rules or their approvals. We just have to follow our ordinances. So this idea of a difference between private property and public or city-owned property, we think it sort of falls into three buckets: engagement, process, and stewardship. So on the engagement side, for private property right now, there's nothing required. There's no required engagement for that. But I think we saw, particularly with like Metro Health and projects like that, that there should be engagement, or there should be some more engagement for these larger projects. And so we'll talk about later on how that can happen. But that engagement on private property rights, should be led by the property owner and not by the city. Public property, city-owned property, completely a different story. And that first bullet there, I think, is sort of a mea culpa. I think we, in the couple of years I've been here, that we've treated our city-owned property in less of a way than we should have. There should be much more engagement, and it should be targeted, and it should be a minimum amount, and it should be city-led. I feel we've turned the tide on that, particularly on Noble Road, where we're doing this neighborhood planning effort, and we've got the PWG project doing engagement as well. That's going to be a good model for us to go forward. But it can't get out of hand, right? It can't be 50 or 100 meetings, because that's where it's a diminishing returns.
Yep.
Process. Private property, it's really just that formal design process outside of any engagement that somebody might do. And that's staff guidance. So we're telling an applicant, this is what you do, apply in this way. And sometimes we give recommendations, but often we don't. Different story on city-owned property. Engagement and council involvement early on and throughout. And the staff should be leading those efforts. And then tying it all together, stewardship, it's my philosophy that when it comes to private property, while we can help people and guide them, if they ultimately have a project that they want to bring forward, the staff should not stop them from bringing that project forward, because that's their property. And that's where we let our boards and our commissions do work. But that's a different story when it comes to city-owned property, where we do have a say to say, we don't want this there. And we're not even gonna let it get to the level at that point.
May I interject a question at this time?
Yes, you may.
So just because this has been brought up recently where a private property owner, Sal Russo, may ask for public money, or you know what, let's forget that. Let's just, yeah, because I mean, this is obviously out in the public, but I am speaking in generality here. I'm more interested in the policy than a specific instance. When that line is crossed and the two are melded together, where you get a private property owner asking the city for some type of subsidy, do we have a kind of a path for that? That's, how do you meld these together?
We're gonna talk about that, but yeah, you're making an important distinction that if it's private property that's requiring public subsidy, then it falls sort of in between. So there is a role for the city to play. There's an engagement piece that should be required. So I agree at 100%. So I'm gonna just throw it to Karen here to walk through a couple of slides, because one of the things that we heard last year in the PWG project, and even at the Planning Commission, was concern about public notice. Hey, people were saying, I didn't hear about this. So Karen will walk through some distinctions, what it says in our code. At the end, we'll give you some suggestions.
So the first thing for us to think about is what's the purpose of the public notice, and we've been talking about really two tracks. One is the formal design review, so if it's going a project going to ABR or BZA or Planning Commission versus just community engagement. So the first, if we're doing a formal review, that's really to alert the adjacent property owners and those that are most impacted of a process that's taking place, and allow them the ability to come in and comment on if it's an addition to their neighbor's house, how it might impact them, or if they, it's really to hear that comment.
What's the radius? I'm sorry.
I'm gonna go there next.
Oh, okay.
I'll go there next. So it's really the most important is those neighbors that are gonna be directly impacted.
Mm-hmm.
So it tends to be that the plan is developed. We know exactly what's gonna happen now. Maybe the color of the addition hasn't been decided, but the site of the addition or whatever is being done is determined. And then the second really important public notice is when we're trying to get community engagement. And this is really to alert a much larger area, the community or a much larger neighborhood, about an initiative or a project. So this still should have a focus on that immediate neighborhood and the residents that are being impacted, and it should happen early in the process. And I think maybe a good example of that would have been when we were going through a planning study on Compton Road about the Compton Greenway. We really targeted that neighborhood, and we did walking tours, and the intent was really to hear from that neighborhood specifically, but the wider public was also involved and commented. But the target of our paper noticing was really those neighbors in that community. So with our zoning code and all of our codified ordinances show that we are required to provide a notice for variances to the Board of Zoning Appeals for conditional uses that'll be approved by the Planning Commission for any zoning text amendment or zoning map change by council. In our S1 district, which is the Severance Town Center area, all of those like variances or conditional uses go to our Board of Control. The Landmark Commission and the Architecture Board of Review also have to give notice of their meetings and agendas. So in practice, requests for variances to the Board of Zoning Appeals do follow the notice requirements, as do conditional use approval, zoning text amendments. Anything happening in our S1 district gets noticed, landmark and architecture board. But in practice, anything that's on our planning commission agenda, we follow that conditional use requirement. So if it's somebody doing a lot joining, we follow that same noticing, even though the code's not telling us we have to do that. Or most recently, there's something that the planning commission can approve, a reduction in the enclosed parking. Again, we follow the same notice that we're following under conditional uses, even though the code doesn't tell us we have to do that.
Can I ask a quick question about S1? Is S1 mean inside the ring or outside the ring, or
It's
doesn't it
both.
matter?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both, so yeah. It's a good question. So, I'm gonna pull up my note because that's a little bit too small for my eyes to read, and I don't wanna miss something important. So here, this is just telling what our notice of public hearing says. So it says that we have to provide notice 10 days before the hearing. And so we do this now by posting our agendas on our website for the zoning or BZA. And then for adjacent property owners, the code specifically calls out who we have to send a paper notice to. So it's the property owner, and then the properties on either side that touch or butt that property, and then you go one more parcel out. So the next adjacent parcel is what that means. And then it says anything directly across the street from those parcels that you've identified, and then you look behind the lot that's being under consideration and anything touching that property. So corners count and directly behind. And then if we go to the next one,
Just sorry, before you leave the slide, the last sentence
it's very important.
is very important.
Yeah, so the code specifically calls out that the failure of any person to receive such notice does not affect the right and power of the commission to hear such application or to take action in accord to such public notice. You know, we do our best and send things out by US Post. Sometimes things happen, or sometimes people get their mail and they throw it off to the side and they don't look at it until a week later, and then they open it up and say, oh, I didn't get this notice.
And that's a standard provision in, I'd say, most codes.
Oh.
So, I wanted to give you an example, and I'll let Karen use
Sure.
this, of how
Sure.
we actually come up with the radius map.
So So this actually is really nice. It's our GIS person was able to develop a application for us that we can easily do this online. So I can't, I think the second one's, is that one Cleveland Heights? Okay, I wanna get a Cleveland Heights one. There we go. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit so we can see this parcel. Let's go ahead and close this. What I wanna do is I wanna do a notice map. So if we just select this one, it's gonna, anything I touch, I lost my parcel, this is the parcel. So we go next adjacent and this parcel, which is the next one out, and then anything across the street. Now you see how this is a little bit off kilter? I would probably go there just to be safe. Sorry, I might get my zoning a little bit wrong here, guys, but I'm trying to see as I'm talking to you. But this is the gist of it. And then you would go directly behind this one. So this corner touches, this is the one directly behind it, this is the second corner. So that's it. And then what I wanna do is close that off. There we go. And now what we have the ability to do is you'll see it says owner. And then we can either do it and it'll do it in a way that we can pull it into a mail merge. But for this purpose, I'm gonna tell it that I wanna see labels because I think it's easier for us to see what it's doing. So what this does is this is our GIS map, and we pull this information and ownership from the county records so that we have that information. When I open up this PDF, you'll see that those are the properties I highlighted. And I just wanted to make note that you can see, so here's one that the city owns. Well, obviously, we're not gonna mail a notice to the city, or we try to catch these, so we try to edit these. But then you'll see there's one in here that I believe is an owner who lives out of state. Well, he's the owner, so he gets notice. That's what our code says. We have to send it to the owner. So it doesn't matter where that owner's address is. So that's why we did hear some concerns that there were addresses that weren't even in Cleveland Heights, or they weren't even in Ohio. Why did that happen? Well, it happens because our noticing says we have to notify the owner. And so they have to get notice of that. So that's how that happens. And then this can easily be then turned around and used for our mailings that we send out. And I think the next one, oh, you want me to send it back?
Yeah, I was just gonna, because the next slide talks to it.
Okay,
That's not very many properties either.
well, for that one, now, we do take in consideration what a project is. So a larger scale project, that's what the code says, and we do have to be careful, because we don't want to
No, I
be
understand.
influencing the comments we might hear.
Right.
But we do know that if a project is larger than just a single parcel, that we need to expand that a little bit. And so we use some good judgment and often we'll talk that through together just to make sure that we have an area that makes sense for what the project is. Oh, so here we go.
And I just wanna highlight, you see how when it comes to renters, it shows up as current occupant.
Right.
I'm sure many current occupants, when they get that in the mail, they toss it away because it doesn't even have their name. So there are limitations on how we can publicly send these out.
And then another just statement I'd like to say is on our agendas, we include a link or an address, a web address that you can go to and see the case agenda. And we have a site plan and a short description of what that case is, so that you can get a little bit of information, and then if you want, either email us or call us to make a comment or to ask questions.
So,
This is what we were just talking about.
yeah, so we, obviously that applies to every project and particularly smaller projects, but obviously the crux of the issue here, we've been talking about are these larger projects. So a larger project, not just city-owned ones like City of Meadowbrook, but even Wellington Mews, which is the former Carmelite. So that was a privately owned property, and there was a lot of neighborhood concern about that, and ultimately that developer didn't move forward. So what we do right now is we request that applicants for these larger privately owned properties and also city-owned properties, they hold a community meeting prior to the formal application. And they tend to ask us for that public mailing list because they don't have a list of people. And so we give that to them. And they do the work on their own. We're typically invited, but not involved in it. One of the advantages of that approach is that they're not considered public meetings, so it's a little more, it can be a little more free flowing. But a real disadvantage is that they're not really documented well at all. And we've heard this a number of times on different projects that, first of all, I didn't hear about the meeting, we had a hard time sort of proving that they had sent it out to the right people, but also, that there wasn't enough to the meeting itself. And so that's last bullet is that right now we can't force an applicant to do any of this actually, because it's not in our zoning code, it's not part of a rule or regulation. Particularly when it's private property, they can simply just apply. And if they submit all the proper materials, then they can appear on an agenda. Of course, that board or commission can ask for more information, and it typically happens, but it's not something that upfront we can load up, which I think you'll see we want to do. So we've got some suggestions here. First and foremost, let's actually require at least one community meeting for a larger private property project. We'll need to define what that means. It shouldn't apply to everything. It shouldn't apply if you want to change the door on your house. But, we know what a larger project is, and let's define that. And let's say that meeting has to be held at least 1 month before the planning commission. One thing we've found is they're holding these meetings 1 week, 1 day before the planning commission meeting. So how are they possibly able to change it based upon what they're hearing? So then people get frustrated. And then we do want to get some sort of proof from that community meeting, a sign-in sheet, a video, to show that they held this and it actually happened, and make that as part of the planning commission submittal. So this could be in the zoning code itself, or we could just make it part of that, these rules and regulations that we're asking of people. For city-owned property, this is where we should probably have more of a conversation, but what we're thinking is, let's require in the purchase agreement that at least 2 meetings occur prior to the formal design review and/or development agreement. Before we talk about it, just some more ideas about that. The meeting should be topical, so if we know, for example, traffic and parking is going to be a big issue, which it is on almost every project, let's have a meeting that's dedicated to that. We're finding more and more, particularly with our Noble Road conversation, people wanna show up to certain topics, but not necessarily everything. And especially if we're having multiple meetings. You know, that's a lot to ask of people, and we don't want them to miss the thing that they're interested in. So if we can be upfront and clear in our purchase agreement, hey, you're gonna hold a meeting on traffic and parking, and then whatever the other issue is, big issue, density, open space, you know, let's just program that in. More meetings could be woven in, depending on the size of the project and what we think about it. But we shouldn't start off by saying that the number of meetings can change in the middle of the process. Let's be upfront. If it needs to be 5 meetings or 7 meetings, let's just say that in the purchase agreement so everybody understands. They should be co-led by the city and the applicant, including us doing the outreach and the mailings. Let's not depend on the applicant to do that. We have the information anyway. And just one caveat that if we've already done a planning effort in that neighborhood and that project has been identified, then we probably don't need to go through all this. You know, if they say, hey, this site should be developed as, you know, housing, then we don't need to go crazy in terms of having additional meetings.
But the first two meetings is prior to them coming to the planning commission.
Yes, exactly. And some time to spare.
Right, okay.
Noticing requirements, we think they should be expanded, you know, including looking at who it goes to, make sure that that is right size, but also maybe we require that they're hand delivered. That would be a big burden on us, but it's something that we should talk about because at least then we can guarantee that it's getting to the right people. And then process is a really big thing that I wanted to mention here. So reestablish a development review committee. It's something that apparently in the 70s and 80s we used to have here in Cleveland Heights. And it's something that Cleveland has incorporated. It's called PETBOT. So PETBOT is Planning, Engineering, Traffic Engineering, Bureau of Traffic. And what that is the second that there's a project that has any meat to it, all the relevant internal departments meet about it. And they meet with the applicant. And they raise issues. So they get 15 or 20 minutes. But they say like, oh, you know, if you build that, then we're gonna have 500 police calls because it's a dangerous intersection. So the applicant gets some really good input right away and also gets a feel for if this is a go or a no-go. Akron has something similar, it's their integrated development. But we think, PD, fire department, public works, they're really key components to this. Define the place for conversations and updates with council. Is that committee of the whole? Is that council meetings? Is that the P&D committee? Establish regular updates. At the last job I had, the second meeting of the month was dedicated to development. So it was a village. The village would take care of all the operational stuff in the first meeting. And the second meeting would be where the public hearings were, where the presentations were. And so people, including the staff, were able to say, okay, no, we can't do that on April 1st, but we can do that on April 15th. Developers show up to that meeting. It gives just a lot of order and framework.
I'm so glad you're kind of going through this because some of these things I wanted to talk to you about pertain to TAG as well.
Yeah.
But when I went to the National League of Cities, a couple of these ideals I pulled from what other cities were doing that seemed to work very well. And it was another component to that you're kind of addressing somewhat now that I wanted to kind of see what your thoughts were.
There should be a council liaison, whether that's the P&D chair or somebody else, but somebody should be reporting at council meetings, what they're hearing, in terms of development, whether that's planning commission or not. It should be a regular thing.
We just talked about that.
Create clear standard operating procedures or development guide. Up here is New Rochelle, New York, which was a community that is just, booming. And they've got this really detailed guide to developers to tell them every step of the process, exactly what they need to do. And it's like, it's a Bible for those folks. That design infographic, I really want to work with whoever we can to create that infographic and also just our educational materials because this is so hard for people to understand. We're in the midst of updating our planning website to look modern, streamlined. So that's something we're gonna roll out. And then design review is something we're gonna talk to you guys at a future date, but really see how what we're bringing forward to our boards and commissions, what we maybe don't need to, and can different boards and commissions take different responsibilities? So for example, does the ABR and the Landmark Commission both need to review a historic property? Most communities that have a Landmark Commission only have the Landmark Commission review those properties. So let's loosen it up for people to actually get things done. But for those projects that are really big, that need the attention, absolutely, let's have those conversations. So this is our conversation discussion slide, but on the right, you'll see these are two topics that I thought, and they've sort of already been brought up, that we should talk about, like what's the specific role that we're thinking about for this committee? And then as council or as a committee, what are the things that you need to see before you're comfortable in making a decision on that role that you're filling, whether it's financial or agreement based? So that's our presentation. I've got the staff here to weigh in. Brian can tell you sort of what he hears from the developer side. Brian can tell you on the sort of community development side. Karen, of course, is our application and permitting guru. So we're here to chat about this. Got it?
You know what, I actually don't, on the roll, I'd actually like to hear from you on that and then go from there. But, I don't wanna cut off.
No, let's hear from the chair first.
Well, basically with the Planning and Development Committee, I met with Cobb and I kind of talked with Eric a little bit, but after the TAG meeting. At the National League of Cities, they had a couple of cities, quite a few cities, that actually had a technical advisory group. And that group was a part of an advisory group for the Planning and Development Committee, but they were people who were specialized in different fields. And they came from the community who was interested in development and wanted to see development, see the city progress and move forward. And they were able to look at different things and aspects and advise the Planning and Development Committee on different subjects and topics and things like that. And so I kind of introduced it to try to get it established, and I wanted your group to actually see it, to see what you thought about it, and I wanted to work with Eric to see how it could actually help the city and help your department in a way that would help move things forward or along for you as well. There was another scenario that I wanted to try to introduce that other cities was doing as well, which is kind of what you touched on. It was the Planning and Development Committee, a person from the Planning Commission, a person from the the architect, the one for every commission. They all came together, and maybe once a month or twice or once every other month, that was the time for developers to come in. So if a developer wanted to come in and say, hey, I'm interested in developing here. So this was a group of people, and from your department, people from the city, all kind of sit there. We are not giving any advice, or we're not vetting anybody. We're not doing any of that. They still have to go through the same process. But what they do, they're actually throwing the ideals out at us and saying, hey, this is what I want to do. What do you think? And there's someone there from the experts to say, that may work, that may not work. You may need to change this around. So before a developer even starts to spend any money, they have an ideal of what the city is looking for, what the commissions may be looking for, so they can go back and tweak their plan or then come back and go through the actual process of actually trying to do some development here. So I wanted to bring that to your attention as well. And the way they talked about it at the National League of Cities, so many cities were doing both of these two things. I thought it would be something to bring refreshing to our city and also help get some of the community involved who wants so bad to be a part of what we're doing in the city, but to maybe to enhance not to, and like I said, it was a large group, but I wanted to kind of tailor it down. But I wanted to work with you and definitely with the mayor to see, how can we use a tag group as well as the second group to enhance the city. And then the developer who was at the meeting, he actually said it. How come we don't have a venue where they can come in and actually say, this is what we want to do, how can we do it? And they bounce it off of people before they start to spend their money. So that's what I'm kind of looking for from our planning and development group, to be able to do some things like that, where they wouldn't meet, but every other month, we would meet on the opposite months to take care of legislation and to deal and dive into things that the city need us to do. But I also want to use that group as well as more of a training group to help them understand some of the processes. So like the CBG funds, how that is actually categorized under HUD. How is it used? What's the money's used for? So they actually understand some of the processes too, so they may be an expert in one field, but they may not be an expert or know everything they need to know to have a full comprehensive be able to give the advice that we may need, and to be able to say, this is what the CBG funds are for, these are what grants are for, this is what this is for, this is how we use these different things. And I actually investigated and have someone who's able to come in via Zoom and actually present on each one of those topics that will help our city grow and move forward on grants, loans, and different avenues that can help us either obtain financing or funds or grants, or show us how, or if maybe we all know it. Maybe our city knows everything, but maybe some things that we may miss. And because I found about a direct pay, I learned about that at the National Leagues of Cities, where like we bought the police cars and things like that for the environmental, that the cities can write that off on their taxes and get full reimbursement back from it. So those are some things that we learned there that I don't know if the city or if anyone here was aware of it, but it was able to get a lot of great information. So I thought it was a way to just move the Planning and Development Committee forward in a different way, and then engage the community. And also we get that tag group can also help with some of that engagement process that you were talking about in a wider way, because now you got different people from different areas of the city, and it's more of a volunteer. It's not a committee that I'm formally saying this is a committee. It's more of a group, just kind of coming together to just help you and your departments in every way we can possibly help. Not to hinder, not to go against, but to just be more educational and to be involved in how we can help. And especially when the developers, I think you were here when I had the developers roundtable, and all of the developers were talking about how hard it was to get through the red tape of Cleveland Heights and how they didn't want to do work in Cleveland Heights and all those kind of things. And I would love to be able to dispel that myth where we're not hard to work with. You can come here and develop, and it's not a lot of red tape. We have a criteria of how we do development and how we engage the community. So that's kind of a general goal and outline that I would like to see the Planning and Development Committee go. And I would like to even maybe talk to you about maybe, like you're saying, maybe so many every month or every other month we schedule, those are public hearings where, and if we don't have one, we just cancel it and just, make out a schedule. I know some of us don't want to meet every month, but, as I think when I talked to you before, you said every other month or something like that was good and feasible. And I plan to go to the commission meetings, but with my mother being ill, it's been a little difficult right now, but I will get in step soon. But can you tell me, what do you think about what I said that could help you in your department? And hopefully the mayor as well.
I think you summarized it, that there's really two main components of what you're looking at. One is an educational and engagement piece, and then the other one is really that ground, that forum for developers to have some entry into the community. Here's some bigger issues that they may be up against.
Yes.
So both of those are valuable, and they are different functions. So obviously, we were already talking about a development review committee, and actually, yeah, in my last job, the planning commission chair and the board of zoning appeals chair were the two people who also attended. So having the boards and commissions represented on there is really important. Doing it during the daytime at a committee meeting is also, I think, valuable for those of us on staff. And it's also, it gives at least us an opportunity to tell developers like, okay, yeah, work with us, the planning department, get things off the ground, but when you're ready to sort of unveil this, even if it's still conceptual, there's a group, there's a committee where you can start to get some input before you put too much into it. And then the sort of educational piece is also important because that's a lot of what we're talking about here, which is just that people don't understand the process. And in an ideal world, the planning and development committee and the chair in particular should be the champion of development things that come back to council. So if you're able to then come to council, if the three of you, and say, hey, we've been talking about this for 3 months, like, you know, council member, you haven't been at all these meetings, but we have. And, you know, we're comfortable with where this, that adds a lot of value because I feel like right now, since you guys are somewhat in the dark as a body, it's all dependent on the individuals who are showing up to meetings. And that leads to this committee of the whole, sometimes there being differing opinions because there's not one person who's saying, I've been following this from the beginning.
So the goal was really to try to create a structure for the planning and development of how we operate, how we help you and be an assistant, but also, as I said, engage in education around every aspect of what's out there. I mean, if I can get out there and find different avenues along with maybe whatever the mayor is doing on his time and you all are doing on your time. I mean, anything that anybody can bring to this city to help it move forward is a plus, no matter who brings it. And so if we could do that and do it collaboratively and have some ground rules and understand this is our function, this is your function, we're doing this to basically to assist you, to help you, maybe take some of those things off your plate where, you know, developers they know once a month or once every month on a certain day, this is Developers Day. You come to Cleveland Heights and you shoot your shot. And people can tell you, hey, what's good, what's not good, will stick, what will not stick. But I didn't get a chance to talk to Jessica, but I did talk to her vice chair. He was at the meeting and I just threw it out to him. He said, I think that is a wonderful idea. So he was on board. He says he would love to hear more about it. So I didn't want to actually get into anything until I actually had an opportunity to see where you were. How do you think things will we can mesh and collaborate on different things? Yes.
So certainly an occasional informational / educational piece would be good. I think people are interested in these topics and you know, the kind of roundtable forum where we, you know, kind of all get educated a little more and share is good. I would, you know, with this tag group that you're putting together or have put together.
Quite.
Well, it's
We're staff,
yeah,
we're trying to get it
at least you
together.
started with it.
Yeah.
You know, I personally would think I would benefit as a committee member to having some expertise, because we have you guys, I mean, that's what we already have. But it would be nice to have some people from the community who might review agreements that we're reviewing and add their input. Kind of similarly to what you had up here where you put the zoning changes up there and you got some input and I think you had several revised, you know. We could use, I think, some kind of expertise in that same way. You know, they might catch something that we might not catch, that kind of thing.
Well, I would refer that to the director, because what I don't want is, I don't want us to overstep. And
I'm talking about when they're done. When they're done and we're reviewing, they've already, they've already done their review. What I'm talking, and the law department is, written it up. I'm talking about when we're doing a review, a council review. I mean, if you consider that overstepping, make your case.
no, I'm just referring, I wanna refer to
Well-
Eric to see how he feels about that. Is that something that you think is good or bad or indifference or what?
Well, let me ask the question. I think I know what you said, but I'll ask it. So you're saying that basically, once we have a purchase agreement, development agreement for a first reading, you would refer it to the planning development committee,
Right.
who would then use this tag group or whatever they're called to assist in the committee's review.
Right.
And then the committee would provide then a recommendation back to council as a whole.
Well, what we're doing in committee is reviewing it and saying, can we move this forward? And the question always is, besides that role of moving it forward, is do we have anything that we'd like to add or subtract? And that's, I think where we could benefit from.
So I guess what I'm struggling with, I'm gonna look over here to Brian, because in some ways, getting that input early on before it's been fully drafted. For example, if you say, hey, we want you to replace, every tree 1 for 1, which should go into a development agreement, and the developer's like, well, that's gonna be too expensive. That's something that, if that's a desire of council or the committee, that would be good to know upfront, but it's also hard to design a agreement by committee.
Yes. I think ultimately, everyone wants to figure out the best process to most easily move forward with development. And ultimately, whichever of these proposals and groups we end up with, I think listening to it now, I think this will sound like more red tape to the development community. That we're taking what we already have and we're adding potentially 2 to 3 additional layers. So it'll be a question of really defining the when for some of these processes and where they fit in. Ultimately, whether it's a tag or whatever group, really thinking about where they do offer the most value and when in the process that should occur. I think ultimately it's all in the details. Will determine how helpful and beneficial it is, to the city to move some of these forward.
So I was just thinking,
Can I just interject something, because I think we're maybe misunderstanding each other a little bit. First of all, I don't know if we have any information to discuss with an advisory group that before there's a development agreement, I don't know what we'd be talking about, because we're in kind of on the beginning and the end, Here's the memorandum of understanding and blah, 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 here's the agreement, So I hear what Brian's saying, but at the same time, I don't know what we would be asking people to advise us on in the middle. The second thing is, for the part that I'm talking about, I'm not talking about one extra layer at all. I'm saying instead of just the 3 of us sitting around and talking about it, let's add a few people from the community that have expertise in this that would be looking at the same thing we're looking at, just, so it would be done in the same sitting. It's just add them, not add another layer. Just add them to the discussion that we're gonna have anyway. That layer's already there. Yeah. So I guess what it depends on is how much information gets shared with council in between the time we sign a memorandum of understanding and a development agreement. Sure, we could have a discussion with this tag group, or maybe a section of the tag group that had expertise in the particular development agreement that would potentially be coming our way. And depending on how much we knew about it, yeah, we could add something in earlier, but that would be if we were briefed with some significant detail in between.
And I guess I would just add in too, if you're talking about a development agreement process, like you have to be careful in what venue you're having those discussions, because that's a negotiation you don't necessarily wanna have in public.
Right,
And I would just add, particularly with some of the people that you've invited to the group so far, there would be a conflict of
They would, everyone, they knew from
Yeah.
the first, everyone was not gonna be a part of a actual group. But it was just to get the conversation going to establish and what the thought process is.
So I was thinking that I do think there's value, so a purchase agreement is signed. They've gotta go out and do their community engagement.
Right.
There's gonna be a period of time, let's call it 3 months, between that and the development agreement showing up on anyone's plate. So in that in-between time, there's value, I think, in the committee, maybe not the TAG, but the committee saying in a meeting, here's some things that we want to be in that development agreement. 'Cause I think often what we run up against is, that first reading comes before you and then in an executive session or whatever it is, you say, oh, by the way, we wanna make sure that we have this in there. Well, that's already, the whole thing has been drafted already, so.
I get the too late thing, believe me.
Yeah, so if there's something really important on a particular project, hearing that early on from the committee would be valuable. I'm not sure yet how, on the back end, with people who are,
Right.
I don't know how they would fit into that.
I'm glad we talked that through, and I'm certainly not suggesting anything that falls into the negotiation category. That's not the type of advice but
And if there's something that you think we need a deep dive in,
here's a good example. The focus group that's working on Noble Station or whatever they're gonna call it. So I don't consider that part of the negotiation, really. I consider that, oh, we should have this instead of that, and and then the project changes as it moves along. I've actually witnessed this. I'm just speaking in terms of the planning committee right now.
Gotcha.
I think we should be doing something like that, I don't know that, I think it's kind of odd if we don't. But, or we could just review the legislation.
Well, I know Eric is a person who's always out in the community. You've been in the community ever since you started, in different neighborhoods and talking to people. And I'm a community person who likes to be out there and like to help bring some engagement to the community. Basically, it's just what can we do to assist the process and the engagement process. I definitely want to bring about the developers, I don't know if you call it Developers Day or whatever, where they just come and throw stuff and see what sticks. But at least they are bringing things to a group of people who are knowledgeable enough to be able to say, maybe you don't want to bring your money here, you may want to go home. Or, yes, bring your money here because everything you're talking about, I think, will pass through all of the commissions and things you need to do. Or people are giving them advice of maybe what they need to tweak before they can actually come and put in a agreement with Brian. So, and the TAG group, go ahead.
I am curious how that would work. I guess a developer's day for them to, sort of cold pitch ideas. I don't think we'd get many legitimate takers on. That they would be doing their own research and developing a project, probably having some initial contact already with staff at that point. And I think, it's simple things like, frankly, if it's a public venue to pitch an idea, that's, one of the first times we're really exploring it or hearing about it. If it's a really good idea, they're gonna be scared someone's gonna undercut them and take the idea.
Madam Chair.
Well, I know it's help is happening in a lot of other cities, and that's why I brought it. And I'm also aware that something else you just said. And a developer actually asked for something like that in the last meeting. So it just kind of resonated some kind of way, like, maybe this is something that could possibly work or could be tried.
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes.
Sorry to jump in from the side over here. I did want to ask two questions. I'm wondering if you have the contact information for that developer that requested such a thing, would you maybe reach out to them and allow them the opportunity to explain that in detail to us? And then additionally, I think one of the things that sometimes gets lost in what Director Zanft has been saying, talking about sort of having an understanding as we move through our negotiations with and attraction of developers and business owners, if there are specific principles that council and council members have that they take with them as they judge any of these developments or business assistance proposals, we would want to know that so that we can prepare sort of general principles. You mentioned one-for-one tree replacement for particular developments, those sorts of things. Some people have those types of principles and guidelines that they use.
Like equity.
And I'm wondering if there's a way maybe for each of the council members, both in this committee, but in council generally, can maybe just do a list of their general principles. And I think that could be of assistance as we go through the administrative work of developing, fleshing out, and then presenting proposals to council for approval. In general, approval and sort of the more basic frameworks are where a legislative body fits in. And so I think it would be very helpful for our purposes to get an understanding of what council members' generally held principles are on these topics.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea as far as putting together maybe a piece,
Like a
just a
report
one sheet of
to us.
this is what Councilwoman Russell would want to see in every legislation. That's part of any type of development, CUDA, whatever, yeah.
So in Director Zanft's presentation, point of first contact, planning department. I would worry a little bit about if that wasn't the point of first contact, for the simple fact that really what Assistant Directors Anderson said as well, you wouldn't want, that's for people who like, I want to do something in Cleveland Heights and they want to present that. Now, in a public forum, if, I don't want to call it spitballing, I can't think of where people are just brainstorming. That's some nicer sounding word. I think that could be interesting, but I don't know that it would be an ongoing thing. But, it could be interesting if people wanted to speak to us in a public forum. But again, then I go back to Assistant Director Anderson. I don't know if somebody really hit on something, if they'd be comfortable with like that in a public forum, like as something that might be co-opted.
Go ahead.
Maybe to sort of tie this different ideas, I think I remember the developer you were talking about. And my take, but we should definitely talk to them, was that they were saying, okay, we've reached out to the city, we've pitched an idea, but we want to know if it's ever going to make its way through the broader public or through council, and we don't know how to do that. In some communities, developers call up each and every council person and they have conversations and they.
True, that's what's happening now.
But there is real value in again, they've already got a project in mind, it's not a trade secret, and coming to a place where there's at least 3 people from council and maybe all these other people from staff and from other departments that are there to say, here's your issues, or we love it. Now go through the process. So I think there's a way to do it, but it's I don't know about a developer day where they just.
Well, not necessarily,
Yeah.
as I didn't know no other term to call it at the particular moment, but I'm just trying to give you the concept of what is happening in other cities. These two groups are happening in a lot of different cities around the country. And it was well received and it was well delivered. And I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to try something like that in our city. And, just to discuss it and try to establish what would we do, how would we do it, but we would need the collaboration of, you and your department to say, hey, this is how you could help. this is how this committee could work, or this group, I shouldn't say a committee, this group could actually work in these venues.
I did want to give just a different example.
Mhm.
But I could see a group of developers coming in and saying, we want to do accessory dwelling units in your city. We would want to do that in your city, but right now we can't because the zoning doesn't. Like there are topical conversations at the committee where we could have developers really inform us on how they can and can't do things. It wouldn't be project specific, but it would be areas where we know.
That sounds,
Yeah.
Policy discussions.
Policy discussion.
Yeah, there you go.
Tiny homes,
Yeah.
things like
Mhm.
I think that's the way to go.
that. And if it's every other month, then again, it's
Yes.
like we can start to schedule them out.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes.
I know we're probably gonna wrap this up pretty soon. On my one pager, here's my goal. As a council, and this, we wanna do this with
Definitely.
the administration.
Mhm.
And not just your department, but with the administration all. And I think that our expectations about our role in the economic development process need to be clear. And I think we need to have agreement amongst ourselves that this is what we need. And then if we're saying we need this and we're being unrealistic in some way or or detrimental, but I will tell you, having gone through I'm not saying that the one process that I clearly did not like and publicly criticized is a roadmap for that the city is taking. But the only way I'm comfortable with avoiding something like that is to come to some type of understanding. And I think we need to do it within council. But what I would like to see happen is I would like you to review this. It's a one-page document, so it's not, it's up to you whether or not you think this is worthwhile. But if you could review this, and then when council reviews it and say a committee, well, I'd like to review it in committee whole. We could come to some type of agreement about.
Would you like to, suggestion, would you like to, if he has time to review it, give some recommendations on it, then we come back and meet as a committee and discuss his revisions or whatever, and then take it
Before we take
to committee of
that would be fine.
That works.
Because this is pretty short, really, when you look at, the rationale is half the page, and then, that would be,
And I would really love to talk more with you about those different groups and how you because that's a great idea, and I like the mayor's idea as well as putting together and I can ask council to think about what they would want in a development agreement, and we can do maybe a little paragraph of each. Mine is always the same, equity, balance, wages, all of those different things, making sure all people are hired and those kind of things. So.
There's just one thing we haven't addressed yet, and I know we're short on time, so we can maybe just do it in our comments, but I know in what you wrote and what you said, there was an expectation that council has some input prior to the purchase agreement or the MOU. That's an area where I think we'll inform you how that's gonna be challenging.
that was verbal, right? That's not something
I don't know if it's in there, but I know you said it verbally.
yes. And but just in context, I said that in response to you saying, well, if you do this after the development agreement, it's too late. And I'm saying, okay, well, really what I should have said was, well, tell us how we could do that.
So we'll tell you how to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be between,
Yeah.
But I think the solution that the mayor offered as far as doing that actually speaks to what you're saying and also speaks to what Brian said as well. Because we're giving him a list of what each council person is expecting in every agreement. It may be general, it may tweak a little bit based on what the agreement is, but as a basic statement or something you want to see all the time in all agreements, then he has it and he can make sure those things are in there as much as possible.
I can see that you're open to it because you took a lot of suggestions and revised 031. you know, so we just, I think, believe that we could potentially have some ideas that, you know, might be helpful as well.
I was going to say along those lines, I think it'd be very helpful to know upfront things that would want to be included in the agreements. If we're going to move towards doing some sort of developer group to provide feedback on the challenges in Cleveland Heights, before we sort of formalize that, put that in front of that group
Oh,
to
good
let
idea.
them give feedback on how much, you know, of an impact does that have on the attractiveness of Cleveland Heights to invest.
That's a good idea.
Because I've seen a lot of Cleveland, to be honest, the city of Cleveland falls into this trap. They roll out new development policies and never talk to the development community.
Yeah.
And then they've created policies that certainly are admirable and look good on paper, but prohibit certain investments to be able to move forward.
It would be nice to even have developers to come in and actually talk to people and find out what their issues are, what their problems are.
Mhm.
So that, I mean, we could really, I think that would be and then you all can sit in the back and take notes or ask questions to how can you help or whatever.
You know, we have the opportunity to help support and encourage development in our city, but at the same time, that development doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
You know, there are market realities that interact with what we want to prioritize and the goals that we may have, and understanding how those two things intersect, I think, is important as well.
I think so. So I'm gonna roll back to you, Mayor, if I may, from what you heard, as far as this collaboration of trying to get these couple groups together, what is your thought?
My thought is that in all likelihood, the most beneficial and effective way that we're gonna be dealing with development is for the direct connection between the planning and development department and my office with developers. As the initial contact and the sort of the standard, which is used in, you know, pretty much everywhere. To work through issues that we know we have to deal with and that we recognize and that we're trained in. To work through the financials, work through actual development deals, and bring them to council for council's review and approval or denial. I think that one of the things that will make our jobs easier is to have an understanding up front about where council stands on general ideas so that we can take those into account as we're having conversations with developers and business owners. That will enable us, as long as those things aren't variable and mutable as sometimes these things are, will give us a bit of a firmer footing in terms of being able to predict what a particular outcome might be, not with absolute certainty, but with some degree of confidence that something won't be thrown at a developer or a business owner at the last minute. I know that one of the urges might be, and I'm not saying that this is shared universally, but sometimes there is an urge for, say, an approval body to be in on the discussion at the outset. And the rationale for that is that then the concerns that that approval body might have can be discussed, taken into account throughout the entire conversation with the developer. That causes a wide variety of problems in that, you know, we have sort of a separated government for a reason. And if not, then we're just a unitary government and we might as well be county commissioners. That's not really a workable solution, especially considering the fact that we've got trained professionals who are working through business conversations. And you know, obviously I don't generally get in the way of the trained professionals doing their work, whatever my degree of training is on those topics, and there's a reason for that. There's a technical aspect of it that I think needs to be fulfilled. I think there is value, though, in bringing council's perspective into those discussions, and that would require us having an understanding of council's perspective, and that can be sort of sussed out over time. as we continue to have, these conversations and we go through examples of projects that run into roadblocks and we learn from those roadblocks, and that is one way to do it. We've done it that way. But this is another way where council provides sort of a report to the administration to give us some insight into what kinds of things you would be looking for. Obviously, with no guarantee that everything that every council member wants on every deal is gonna make it into every deal. That's just not feasible. But there is the potential, at least a greater potential, for the administration in our conversations with developers and business owners to bring an eventual council perspective into account at the front end so that we can avoid those things being tossed in at the last minute on the back end.
Or worse, if I may, you got a majority of council people with a red line somewhere and you didn't know about it and negotiated something that,
Right, and that's very helpful, and I think also there is room, in my view, for some informal executive session discussion to give council a bit of an update on certain things, and we've done that on multiple projects. But there are two things that we would request of council. We know that executive session, we generally don't leave, public records in executive session. We don't provide public records in executive session. It is intended to be a private conversation for some really important purposes. But it would be our request that you pay very close attention, maybe even take handwritten notes for yourself during those executive sessions, so that when these things come up later, there isn't confusion about whether or not we had the conversation in the first place, because a lot of stuff gets thrown at council and things get buried, and I know it firsthand. So those are the sorts of things we want to make sure that when we provide that information to council, that it is maintained, remembered, and so nobody's caught, by surprise later. That's another thing that we would request from council in order to make sure that when we do have those preliminary conversations and get some feedback in that executive session environment, that we can take that feedback, but then also council can rely on the memory of that conversation so that council doesn't feel like they're being caught by surprise or blindsided about something. So that's something that we've experienced as well.
just to be clear, you wouldn't want the clerk of council taking notes?
Absolutely not.
Okay, got it.
I don't even think Bill wants us taking notes in executive session.
Well, the
Vote
mayor
on
just
that.
said handwritten notes.
I know, but
I just wanted to clarify that.
We can have a larger discussion about public records and what
yeah, I don't think you can.
applies and what doesn't when it comes to the public records law. The concern isn't that we don't want to keep things private for privacy's sake. This is the public's work, but we also know that there are practical considerations that we need to take into account. And we know that deals can be very delicate at certain stages. And if we are trying to encourage good development in the city, we don't want to ruin good development in the city by exposing it before it's ready to be exposed.
Well, I think sound like we're all on the same page because what the mayor has just articulated to us, we have no intention of doing any of those things. So we will not be messing with development agreement prior to you will be the first contact. If what we have said here, I would definitely reach out to council about what they would like to see basically generally in contracts to make sure I can get that to you and Eric, and also to just to be able to get these two groups together, establish some type of camaraderie and some robust discussions and to be able to assist. And that's the goal.
Just in terms of timing, so is your expectation that we'll be having another committee meeting in a month or 2 months or at some other date? Because per the suggestion earlier, I think we would come back with some suggestions or some comments on one pager and we can discuss that at that time. And then maybe we'll have collected some information.
Okay, I probably could I know I have one scheduled for the 8th with the bigger group, with the larger group, because we're gonna do that every
That's
other
May
month.
8th.
That's May 8th. But we could, if you want, we can, because I was trying not to mix the bigger group with the smaller group. So we could actually do business. So I could schedule something before the 8th.
Also, it could be before hour, just so we know, our timetable to provide it.
Okay. So I can reach out to you, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
let us know if it's
Okay,
before.
okay. All right. But thank you all so very much for the information, for the cooperation, the collaboration, and the feedback. All of it was well deserved and taken to heart. And so at this time, I am going to conclude our planning and development meeting at 1 o'clock.